This is Dan Ferrisi, editor with Sound and Communications Magazine, joined by Dave Labuskes, CEO of AVIXA. The topic of conversation is, of course, InfoComm 2020. It was announced yesterday, Monday, that the show is going to be canceled in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we wanted to talk to Dave about InfoComm, about how best for this industry to get through this, and further thoughts about what AVIXA is doing to serve its members and serve the industry. Thank you for joining us, Dave.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dan.
So can you give us some insights into the deliberations that have been going on over the past days and weeks and what ultimately led to the decision to cancel InfoComm 2020?
Sure. I mean, we've been focused on COVID-19 since, since late or mid-January in preparation for ISE and looking at the impact of this pandemic as it is now in the early days when the world was really starting to think about it. The challenge has always been the timing and understanding how long of an impact the disease would have, how long of a impact on our culture and our gatherings would be. Looking at is it significant for ISE at that stage, and then after ISE starting to track to see what is the duration of this and where will we be in June. And this is one of those classic situations where all of us wish we had a crystal ball. In early March, even mid-March, we were actually very hopeful and optimistic that by mid-June we'd be through this and the industry would be able to use InfoComm as a launch pad for the post-COVID world. But as the disease has progressed, as the epidemic has further spread in the US, it became more and more clear that we were just going to be up against a time frame that was not appropriate for the gathering, and even less ambiguous was the fact that there are months of work that are being done by our exhibitors and their teams in advance of the show that we wanted to ensure they could allocate those resources most effectively and not need to direct them towards a show that might or might not take place. So it was incredibly difficult, challenging time for my team that's been working on the show for over a year. But in the context of the types of decisions that people are making right now, going to or not going to a show is really not a decision that we should feel that in the bigger scheme of things, this isn't the most important thing going on around us right now.
No, that is certainly true. In terms of people who are excited about InfoComm 2020, can we let them know about any kind of a digital or virtual version of the show? Are you thinking about maybe rescheduling it for the fall or something like that? What are your thoughts about InfoComm 2020? Is it going to exist in any iteration at any point in the future?
Yeah, I think InfoComm 2020 will exist in the very least in the hearts and minds of our industry and all of those people that are disappointed about this. We had already been underway and looking at how can we extend the 3-day or 1-week in-person event digitally. In some ways, this frees us from the calendar limitations of June 17 through 19 and opens up the ability to start that engagement earlier and continue that engagement longer. But we also aren't going to waste those days on people's calendars. And so we will certainly have something happening online virtually to connect our community during when they would have been in Las Vegas. We will work very hard to find the appropriate way to get more of the content out on a digital format so that people can experience it virtually. We won't be having a InfoComm 2020. This is a cancellation, not a postponement. That was another key part of the decision. Looking back to what I said about giving our exhibitors and attendees certainty in a time of very little certainty, did not want to put into a situation here where, well, maybe we'll have the show in August, maybe we'll have the show in September. It was either let's do it or not do it. If we couldn't identify a calendar time and a location for an alternative, then we were going to cancel the show, and that's where we ended up.
Makes a lot of sense. In terms of just words of encouragement, words of wisdom for your industry peers, for manufacturers, for integrators, for distributors, consultants, design engineers, people who are suffering right now, personally suffering, professionally suffering, concerned about the economy, concerned about the potential coming of a recession. Do you have any advice for how you feel that they can bolster their business, get their business in a recession-proof posture? Any, even just words of encouragement?
I do. One of the pieces of advice that I was given a number of years ago when I was being coached on how to work with people that are feeling incredibly stressed by a significant challenge in their day-to-day activity was to try to offer perspective. And sometimes that perspective, it's a multidimensional. So the perspective can be, in the bigger scheme of things, how big is this problem, Dan? That one doesn't really work today, because in the bigger scheme of things, this one is pretty much as big as they get. It was also about how long will this last? Let's look beyond the next bend in the road and envision where we will be. And I think that's something that we should both keep in mind for our motivation, our hope, for our stamina through this. And I think what I would advise, what I'm doing with my business, with AVIXA, is I'm focusing on 30 days, I'm focusing on 3 months, and I'm focusing on 1 year. And then I'm continuing to focus on 3, 5, 10 years. Mm-hmm. Each of those requires a shift in perspective, a shift in priorities, and a shift oftentimes in leadership style. The style of leadership that individuals have in a time where you're investing and innovating is very different than the style of leadership that you need to exert when you are responding, reacting, and surviving. Through all of them, though, my other piece of advice is, and what I love about this way we're all connecting now, is that we've taken down the barrier between work and life. And there's no way of ignoring the fact that we are all people with pets and with kids and with dishwashers running and with doorbells ringing and with spouses trying to work. And for some reason, we've all spent our career pretending while we're working, and we're at home, we're people. Well, we've always been people in both places. And yes, there's leadership. Yes, there's challenge. But this also forces us to all see each other as human beings and treat each other the way we want to be treated. This isolation or anonymity from the distance, it has to be going away. And so focus on the crisis, get the business through, look at costs, look at revenue, short term, medium term, long term, but through it all, at the end of it, what I do know is long term, we're going to be dependent upon each other as people, and the way we treat people today will impact the way people treat us.
Yeah. I think that that's very true. People have been talking a lot about flattening the curve. I think it's also kind of flattening society, in as much as all of us are realizing we're in the same boat, no matter what industry we're in, what financial resources we have, what our family situation looks like. In this COVID-19 crisis, we're all in the same boat. So I think people are starting to realize we have a lot more in common than we realize.
I had one of the tricks I would use when I'd get frustrated with somebody, not that it ever happens, that, somebody that, somebody from, the whole sort of Twitter sniping, or everybody has an opinion, right? Mm-hmm. And what I would do is I would cause myself consciously to pause, and I would picture them as a father with their child on their lap while they were reading them a story, or I would picture them as a mother trying to go to work and drop her kids off at school. What I did is I would force myself to see them as a human being, and then suddenly they were no longer just an opinion or a disparaging comment. They were a human being that had their own perspective. That's not that hard to do these days with the way that we're all communicating with each other.
I think that that's very, very true. Well, thank you very much for your comments, Dave. Certainly, if there's anything else you'd like to add, I'd love to hear it. But otherwise, stay well. Best to you and the entire AVIXA family. And I know that we, as an industry family, a commercial AV family, are going to get through this. I know AVIXA is going to play a big part in leading that. Hopefully, Sound and Communications can as well. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.